Hello, beautiful souls. It's so good to be with you today. Have you ever had that moment when everything you believed about your life shattered in an instant? When trust collapsed like a house of cards? 7 years ago, I experienced the most humiliating betrayal at my in-laws' Thanksgiving dinner. A moment that broke me so completely that I disappeared from my own life. But life has a way of bringing us full circle in the most unexpected ways. If you've ever faced betrayal or had to rebuild from nothing, stay with me. This is my story. When I met Vanessa, it felt like finding a missing piece of myself. She was elegant, cultured, from old money. Everything I wasn't. I'd grown up in rural Ohio, raised by a single mother, working scholarships through college, and building my architectural firm from scratch. When she looked at me with those captivating eyes, she didn't see my humble beginnings. She saw my dreams, my determination, my future. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met," she told me on our third date. "Most men in my circle were born on third base thinking they hit a triple. You built the entire stadium." Her family, the Harlows, were Connecticut aristocracy. Old money, old connections, old prejudices. From our first meeting, I felt the chill of their disapproval. Frederick, her father, would examine my clothes with barely concealed disdain. Beatrice, her mother, would introduce me as Vanessa's architect friend, even after our engagement. Thomas, her younger brother, made trust fund jokes when he thought I couldn't hear. But Vanessa defended me. "They'll come around," she promised. "They just need time to see what I see in you." I believed her. God, I believed her. For the first few years of marriage, we were happy. My business grew steadily. We bought a beautiful home. I thought perhaps the Harlows were finally accepting me. Looking back, I can see the cracks forming, how Vanessa would tense when I spoke at family gatherings, how her laughter became forced when I shared business successes, how she started spending more weekends with her family without me. Have you ever felt yourself being slowly erased? It's not a sudden obliteration, but a gradual fading, a brushstroke here, a detail there, until you barely recognize yourself. Thanksgiving at the Harlows estate was always an elaborate affair. Crystal that caught the light. Silver polished to mirror shine. Conversation that moved like fencing matches. Quick thrusts of wit, parries of clever comebacks, all with the potential to draw blood. That final Thanksgiving 7 years ago, I arrived feeling buoyant. My firm had just won a major contract over our biggest competitor, the Henderson Group, owned by Preston Henderson, Vanessa's ex-boyfriend, and the man her family had always preferred. This victory felt personal, vindicating. Maybe now they'd see my worth. I remember every excruciating detail of what happened next. The heavy silence as I entered the dining room carrying folding chairs Thomas had sent me to fetch. The peculiar expressions, some pitying, some amused. Vanessa, wineglass in hand, mid-speech at the head of the table. I mean, dating apps have a 99% success rate these days. "He's the 1% failure," she laughed, pointing directly at me. Time froze. Blood rushed in my ears. "Oh, honey," she continued, voice dripping with mock affection. "I was just telling everyone about our meet-cute. You know, the marriage mistake." Frederick cleared his throat, but Beatrice jumped in. "Well, darling, you could always upgrade. Preston just finalized his divorce and he was asking about you at the club." Laughter rippled through the room while something broke inside me. Cleanly, irreparably. 7 years of small digs, of being the outsider, of watching Vanessa's gradual transformation from a woman who'd once loved my ambition to someone embarrassed by my presence. It all crystallized in that moment. I set down the chairs with strange calm. Without a word, I walked upstairs to our guest room, packed my suitcase, placed my wedding ring on the dresser, and walked out the front door. Behind me, I could hear Vanessa dismissing my departure. "He's so sensitive sometimes. He'll be back." But I wouldn't. I couldn't. Have you ever reached that breaking point where staying would cost more than leaving? Where would you go? What would you do? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. In the weeks that followed, I executed a plan born from desperation. With my lawyer Martin's help, I disappeared completely. New identity, new social security number, new life. Devin Mercer ceased to exist. Davis Morgan was born. I moved to Portland, Oregon, as far from Connecticut's old money circles as I could get. Took a job as a draftsman at a small architectural firm, lived in a tiny studio above a bookstore. At night, I'd wake in cold sweats, dreams of Vanessa's mockery still ringing in my ears. But slowly, day by day, I rebuilt myself. The owner, Russell, recognized my talent. I advanced quickly from draftsman to junior architect to partner. My designs, modern structures with sustainable elements, began winning awards. Davis Morgan became known in architectural circles, my work featured in magazines. For 5 years, I lived looking over my shoulder, afraid of being discovered. Then, gradually, I stopped being afraid. I had built a life from nothing once before. I knew I could do it again if necessary. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I'd wonder about Vanessa. Had she married Preston as her family wished? Was she happy? Did she ever regret that Thanksgiving night? These thoughts came less frequently as years passed. The wound scabbed over, though it never fully healed. 7 years after vanishing, it happened. I was reviewing plans for an eco-resort when my assistant interrupted. "There's someone insistent on seeing you, Mr. Morgan." A woman named Nina Reeves. The woman who entered wasn't a potential client. "Mr. Morgan? Or should I say Mr. Mercer?" she said, placing a folder on my desk. My expression remained neutral. "I think you have me confused with someone else. Your documentation is impressive," she smiled, "but facial recognition software has improved significantly. A design magazine featured you at the Seattle Architectural Showcase last month. The algorithms found you. 7 years of careful construction, a new identity, a new life, a new reputation, all potentially collapsing because of a magazine photo." "What do you want?" I asked. "I was hired to find you." "Now I have," she stood. "They'll be here tomorrow. I've given them your address and workplace." After she left, I sat motionless, staring at the Portland skyline. I had contingency plans, another identity, accounts in different names, but running would mean rebuilding from zero once more. No, Devin Mercer had run once. Davis Morgan wouldn't. The next morning, they arrived at precisely 10:17 a.m. Vanessa entered first, still elegant at 42, though lines of stress now framed her eyes. Behind her came Preston Henderson, more gray at his temples but wearing the same self-assured expression I remembered. Following them were Thomas Harlow and, surprisingly, Liam Bennett, my former business partner. "Devin?" Vanessa's voice broke on my name, her eyes red-rimmed. "It's really you." "It's Davis, actually." "Davis Morgan," I corrected, leaning back to observe them with clinical detachment. What could possibly be so urgent after 7 years? "Our son," Vanessa whispered, tears spilling over. "Alexander is sick, very sick. He needs you." For the first time, my composure wavered. "Your son with Preston is not my concern." "That's what we need to tell you," Liam interjected. "Alexander is your biological son." The ground seemed to shift beneath me. A son? My son? A child I never knew existed? "After you left that night, I discovered I was pregnant," Vanessa explained. "About 6 weeks along. I tried to find you, but you'd vanished completely." "When we married, I agreed to raise him as my own," Preston added, jaw tight. The timing worked. No one questioned it. "And now he's sick," Thomas said. "Acute myeloid leukemia. He needs a bone marrow transplant. We've all been tested. None of us are compatible." I studied their faces, searching for signs of manipulation. The Harlows had always been excellent at deception. I demanded proof, medical records, independent verification, DNA testing. If and only if everything checked out, I would consider helping. Not for them. For an innocent child who never asked to be born into their family, has life ever thrown you a curveball that changed everything? A revelation that forced you to rewrite your entire story? I'd spent 7 years building walls against the Harlows, and now those walls were threatened by the existence of a child, my child, fighting for his life. 2 days later, Dr. Sanjay, a specialist I trusted, confirmed everything. Alexander existed. He was my biological son, and he was fighting an aggressive form of leukemia. A bone marrow transplant from me represented his best chance for survival. I needed to see him. Not with them present. Just the boy. At Connecticut Children's Hospital, I stood outside his room, heart pounding against my ribs. Through the window, I saw a small figure in the bed, dark hair like mine, pale skin, animated despite the IV lines as he played a video game. "Are you another doctor?" he asked when I entered, pausing his game and assessing me with startlingly familiar eyes. My eyes. "Something like that," I replied. "I'm Davis." "I'm Alex. Are you here to poke me with more needles? Because I'm kind of on a boss level right now." Despite myself, I smiled. "No needles today. I just wanted to meet you. Are you the one who's going to give me new bone marrow?" "Possibly." I sat beside his bed, studying this small person who carried my DNA, my features, my apparent love for building things. "You look like me," he observed. "Mom has a picture of a man who looks like you, but she keeps it hidden in her dresser. She gets sad after looking at it." Something tightened in my chest. "Does she now?" "Yeah." "Are you him? Are you my real dad?" 7 years of careful distance collapsed under the weight of 5 simple words. "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "I'll be your donor." "Thank you," he said simply, then returned to his game with the resilience only children possess. In the days that followed, I donated bone marrow, spent hours getting to know my son, and set in motion a plan that had evolved from pure revenge to something more nuanced. The Harlows and Preston had been using Alexander's illness for their own purposes. Frederick saw him as a research subject for his biotech investments, Preston as a burden. I would stop them. Not with the scorched earth approach I'd initially planned, but with surgical precision. I would protect Alexander, and, surprisingly, Vanessa too, who I discovered had become as much a victim of her family's manipulation as anyone. 3 months later, I stood on the observation deck of Portland's tallest tower, Alexander beside me, both admiring the city sprawled below. "It's huge!" he exclaimed, pressing against the glass. "Can we see your buildings from here?" "A few of them." I pointed toward the river. "That's the Riverside Cultural Center we designed last year." It was Alexander's first visit to Portland, part of our new custody arrangement. 1 week with me every month, plus holidays split between parents. The transition had been smoother than expected, with Alexander adapting to the new reality with remarkable resilience. As for the Harlows, Frederick faced multiple federal indictments for securities fraud and research violations. Preston had accepted a plea deal, implicating others to reduce his own sentence. The architectural empire they'd built now belonged to me. The ultimate irony. Vanessa had surprised everyone, including me. Freed from both Frederick's control and Preston's manipulation, she had returned to her original passion, art history, securing a position at a small museum in Hartford. We weren't friends, Vanessa and I. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. But we were partners in raising a remarkable boy who deserved better than the toxic legacy of the Harlow name. That evening, Alexander presented his creation, a detailed architectural model showing 3 structures connected by bridges, surrounded by gardens. "This one's your house," he explained, pointing to a modernist structure. "This one's Mom's. And this smaller one in the middle is mine. See the bridges? So I can go between them easily." The thoughtfulness of the design, the way Alexander had processed his new reality and created something beautiful from it, moved me deeply. "It's brilliant," I said softly. "You have real talent." "Mom says I get that from you," he replied proudly. Later that night, standing on my balcony overlooking Portland, I reflected on the journey. 7 years ago, I had left Connecticut with nothing but determination and rage. Now I had something I'd never anticipated, a son, a future beyond revenge. I didn't believe in forgiveness. That Thanksgiving night had broken something irreparable between Vanessa and me. But from that breakage, something unexpected had grown. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, but perhaps something more durable, a foundation built on hard truths rather than comfortable lies. The cycle would end here. The bitterness that had defined the Harlow legacy would not touch Alexander. He would inherit only the strength, the resilience, the capacity to build rather than destroy. That would be my true revenge, raising a son who would build bridges rather than burn them. Perhaps that's the most important lesson I've learned. True healing isn't about erasing the past, but building something worthy from its broken pieces. The most beautiful structures often rise from the most damaged foundations. Have you found ways to create beauty from betrayal? To build something new from pain's ashes? Share your story below. We heal in community, in knowing we're not alone on this journey. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe and join our family of healing hearts. Until next time, remember that your story isn't over. Sometimes the most painful chapter precedes the most beautiful one.